Alright, we are back with a new video, and today we are once again updating the Survivor 42 Power Rankings following episode 10. We are now at the final 7, we just had the final 8, and this was an okay episode. I mean, while it technically is a big vote and a big blindside, I didn't get that sense just from watching it. I felt like it was pretty straightforward from the beginning, especially with me saying last week that I felt like the person that went home, and sure enough, that's what happened. But even so, there is some pretty interesting stuff from the edit to talk about. But without further ado, let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 8, we have the boot from this week. And here we have Hai. And as I alluded to a moment ago, I felt like his boot here was pretty foreshown, if you ask me. Now, I said in my last week's video that I felt like Hai or Jonathan were due to be the next couple boots, as I felt like the alliance was going to turn on each other. And I felt like with Hai being sort of the biggest player within that alliance, or the biggest person representing that alliance, it made the most sense for him to go out here. Plus, his edit in this episode just made it pretty clear that he was going to be voted out. He gets content right at the beginning, talking about how he controlled the vote, followed by Omar immediately planting the seeds in Mike to blindside Hai at some point, how Hai's been manipulating Mike for a lot of the game. And sure enough, we see Mike really take the center stage here in wanting to turn on Hai, and sure enough, that's what happens. And there isn't really much doubt either. I mean, they literally tried to throw in a last second curveball with Omar saying how it's too easy, how maybe it might be better to bet out Jonathan. But it was so obvious to me that Hai was going to go home. I think it was obvious to a lot of people, and he was voted out 6-2. And on the whole, I felt like Hai played an alright game for the most part. I mean, in the pre-merge, he was a pretty integral figure there. Mind you, he did get benefited by all the advantages and votes that didn't count from the first tribal, where I felt like had everyone gotten the chance to vote at the first tribal he attended, he more than likely loses Lydia, and from that point on, he's in the minority. However, due to both Chanel and Mike not being able to vote, he's able to get into a situation where he's able to keep his closest ally in Lydia, so that's something at least. Gets to the merge where, again, he is able to form the alliance. He seems to be a pretty big figure in there, but even then, I had the feeling that it wasn't just him, it was also Omar that was involved with that. But unlike someone like Omar, I felt like Hai really put all of his eggs into this alliance, where he didn't really have anyone else outside the alliance and potentially Mike. But even then, Mike had other options, and we see Mike turn on him in this episode, so that's not particularly great. It was pretty clear that he was a pretty big player, and it was only a matter of time before he was going to be voted out. And even edit-wise, I said this from the beginning, how I felt kind of weird about him, how his premiere presented him as pretty game body, only in episode 2 to do a complete 180 and present him as this pretty emotional person struggling to make sacrifices for the game, only for him to come around to that. I found that pretty weird and sort of inconsistent, but I was willing at the time to let it slide. And obviously we see that in later episodes where he does seem to be a consistent presence there. And by the end of the pre-merge, I felt like he had a shot. However, his merge episode really tanked his chances for me, where he talks all about wanting to have agency, and of course we see that through forming the alliance, only for him to not even get his way at the vote, losing his closest ally in Lydia, which is so bad to me, and that really killed his chances moving forward. And sure enough, the next couple episodes didn't really do much for him either, and it's no surprise that he was voted out in this episode, both from a game standpoint and from an edgic standpoint. So, like I said, I kind of liked Hai on the whole. He seemed to be a pretty cool person, like a pretty interesting player. However, it was pretty clear by this point in the season that he wasn't going to win, and he's here at number 8. And with that, we are now moving to the 7 people still in the game. And as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely it is that they'll win the game from this point. And obviously, this is going to be a bit of an interesting week, as next week will be the do or die round. Obviously, everyone's favorite twist in the world. So obviously that includes some variance on who might be voted out here or taken out, as well as who might win. However, I feel like at the end of the day, the rankings didn't change too much for me. I don't think anyone significantly went up or down in my overall assessment, but there's still plenty to talk about. But here at number 7, I decided to have Romeo. And like I said, Romeo, again, his game has pretty much gone downhill at this point ever since the merge. again, he's done all right in the pre-merge with him being somewhat in the majority there. But ever since the merge, he's just been left out of the majority alliance, and he really hasn't recovered. And I feel like this last episode made it even more clear that he's been completely left out of the loop with him voting for Jonathan for no reason. Well, we obviously know the reason. It's because he wasn't looped into the blind side. However, obviously, he's also voted incorrectly at several other tribals as well. He did throw that hinky vote onto High, which he did get credit for in the last episode, but still not enough. It's still pretty clear that he's not winning the season. I still think there is a potential chance he gets to the end. I mean, given what he said right before the merge. However, again, if he does go out through do or die next week, I wouldn't be too surprised either. He doesn't seem like the biggest challenge competitor in the world, and he probably would feel incentivized to compete in next week's challenge. So again, it's not looking great for him, and I have him here at number 7. Now we're moving on to number 6, and this person has not fared super well for me either, and this was not the bounce back that they needed, and here we have Jonathan. And like I said, I feel like last week was a very bad episode for Jonathan, and again, while it wasn't enough to completely rule him out, I mean, I was kind of paying attention to see if he got a bit of a bounce back here. I felt like he didn't really get that. I mean, it still seems like he's going to be a pretty big threat moving forward. I mean, he was the decoy vote that the majority was using to tell High, and even Romeo seemed to believe it by the end of it. And again, I feel like that's not going to go away, even though like he's not even the most winningest player in terms of immunity challenges. I mean, obviously Lindsay wins both the immunity and the reward from this episode, but obviously Jonathan is always in it. I mean, even in this episode where it was an endurance challenge, I mean, he was the second place finisher in that, so he's going to be a constant presence at the end of the day. However, it's not looking great. I mean, edit-wise, like, again, it's really dried up for him at this point. Even at Tribal, like, where he, obviously, he hears the comment about leveling the playing field, and he's like, what do you mean by that? Which, you know, could mean one of two things. It could either mean them targeting him as a physical threat, or him potentially referring to the conversation that happened at last Tribal, which, again, did not present him in the best light. So, again, I'm not feeling too great about him, and he's here at number 6. Now we're moving on to number 5, and we have a bit of an interesting person to talk about. Again, from a pure gameplay perspective, I feel like this person's been doing all right. However, edit-wise, it's just not there, and here we have Andrea. And Andrea is interesting to talk about. I mean, like I said, I was wrong in her saying that she would go out with all the advantages in her pocket. I mean, she did play the idol. I mean, she still has her knowledge is power, which she'll probably use on Mike if she's given the chance. And through voting out High in this episode, her aimlet has now become a steal a vote. So like I said, she still has a number of advantages, even though she did technically play one this last round. However, even so, like, I'm still not feeling great about her at the end of the day. I mean, her edit's not really being set up for a win. She's obviously in the majority for this vote. However, I'm still not feeling great about her overall longevity in the game. And I actually, when thinking about the do or die twist, I actually think she could be a likely contender for being the victim of do or die, if I'm being honest. I mean, she hasn't gotten that much screen time in this episode, maybe as a way to forget about like her role in the episode before that, with her being in the conversation at the previous tribal. I mean, they had to show that, so they couldn't completely hide her. But obviously with this episode, they didn't really show her that much. She wasn't that involved in the action. And to me, that could be a signal that maybe she is a victim of do or die, and maybe they don't want us to feel as bad for her. And plus it would tie into her going out with a whole bunch of advantages in her pocket. Like, I'm still not feeling great about her actually being able to utilize a lot of these advantages, even though she definitely has opportunities to do so towards this end game. So those are all factors that I considered when assessing her. And like I said, the bad edit plus her potential to go through do or die, or at least in my intuition, it seems likely. So because of that, I have her here at number 5. Now we're moving on to number 4, and this is sort of an interesting person to talk about, as this was a pretty big episode for this person. However, it's not really enough to elevate them, in my personal opinion. And here we have Lindsay. And the main reason I moved her up Andrea is because, again, she had a bigger episode this week. She obviously has the content at the beginning, like talking about the previous vote, and her even looking for the idol only for her to not find it, which seems more of a negative the more that I think about it. I mean, the fact that they went out of their way to show her not finding the idol is a bit of a red flag. However, there is still plenty of positivity to consider. Like, she wins both the reward and the immunity challenge. She gets to go on the reward that includes like pizza, but also the family visit. And this is sort of an interesting editing decision at the reward where we see them like at the sanctuary having the pizza, but then they also show the videos from home. Now, this is interesting because last season on 41, they had the exact same reward, including the family visit. However, obviously, we did not see the family videos on the edited show, even though we know that they happen through exit interviews. But obviously, one reason for that is that Erica was not on that reward. And I found that very interesting. Like, so now to go from 41, where they didn't show the reward, to 42, where they do show the family stuff while on the exact reward, makes me think that the people who are on this reward may be top contenders, in my opinion. And obviously, Lindsay is a part of that, but also Omar and Mike, which I'll be talking about soon. I think that decision to include the family stuff in this reward in this season, while they didn't in last season because they did not show the winner there, is an interesting choice for me. It makes me consider the people that were on that reward in a higher light. So I think that is something that is propping up Lindsay to a certain extent. And obviously, she wins the immunity challenge as well. And I think she is in a decent game position right now. Like I said, she's still there with Omar. She's still there with a lot of the talking members. And she obviously has her amulet, which is now upgraded to a steal vote. She definitely has a number of advantages going for her. However, I still don't think she's a winner per se. I mean, like I said, while this was a pretty good episode for her, I mean, I can't ignore all the stuff that has happened beforehand. Like, she doesn't seem to have much of a story even before this. And even in the episode, while she does give a lot of positivity, she still has that bit of negativity with her being shown not finding the idol. So those are all big concerns for me. And I mentioned this a moment ago with Andrea, but I think there is a non-0% chance that maybe Lindsay could be the victim of do or die as well. I mean, that is definitely a possibility as well. I mean, while I can't say I know for sure who the do or die victim is going to be, I feel like Lindsay is probably one of the more likely people of the people still in the game, my personal opinion. So that's not particularly great. And even outside of that, like, her edit in the grand scheme of things is not enough to have her too high. And I have her here at number 4. Now we're moving on to number 3. And as usual, it is the same top 3 as last week. And I did have a debate over the order. For this week, I did consider moving this person up from last week. However, after thinking about it some more, I just decided to leave Mike here at number 3. Now, it was a bit of a tough decision for me, as on one hand, I think this episode was a bit of a bounce back for Mike. I mean, he definitely gets to explain his vote a bit, and he does get a decent amount of credit for the high vote at the end of the day. He talks about how he's deliberately trying to be a puppet, or trying to get Omar and to think that he's controlling him, when in reality he's being his own person in the game, which is something at least. And obviously he's a part of the reward as well, gets to see his family, which again, considering they didn't show the family part of the reward last season when they didn't have Erica on it, that makes Mike a bit of a more likely contender for me. However, after thinking about it some more, I don't think this is great from a pure gameplay perspective, because yes, Mike is getting a decent amount of credit for this. He is allowing High to be voted out in order to make Omar and other players feel like they're more powerful at the end of the day. However, again, considering that this is the post-merge, considering that we are now in the jury stage of the game, I mean, the fact that Mike is sort of sitting back and letting others control the game isn't great, in my opinion, especially when that other person is Omar, someone who, while has elements of being a decoy winner, is still a serious contender in his own right. So that's not particularly great, especially if he does get to the end with Omar. I feel like Mike may have trouble explaining his game to a jury if he does get to the end playing the way that he has. And I know there have been some exit interviews that have come out saying that, Mike may not be the best player or doesn't have the best perception. I know Chanel particularly came out as calling him emotional. I can see people like Roxroy thinking that Mike betrayed them or didn't have enough agency in the game to save him during that split tribal. And even now, like while he does vote out High, like and High is a bigger player than him, High was also someone who was technically loyal to him and again taking away one of his allies. And I could see High like approaching this and giving Omar more credit than Mike for this vote. I could see him giving Lindsay more credit for this vote than Mike. So I think from a pure gameplay perspective, like getting rid of High here, yes, High is a big player, but still not great, like at the end of the day. However, it's not really enough to put Mike below third. I mean, he still got a decent amount of credit in this episode for the vote. He got to elaborate a bit on his strategy, which is something at least. However, I feel like as more time passes, I'm feeling conflicted about all this, as I think Mike is still a contender in my eyes. However, I feel like the actual like mechanics of what's happening in the game could come back to haunt him. So because of that, I did decide to leave Mike here at number 3. Now we're moving on to number 2, and it is the same top 2 as last week, just figuring out the order. And again, it was another debate for me, especially since the person at number 2 was on the reward, while the person at number 1 was not. But at number 2, I decided to have Omar. And yes, he was on the reward from this week. Like he did get that family content. I mean, that is a boost for him at the end of the day. The fact that they did show that family stuff on the reward while he himself was on that reward, I think that's something for him. Also, he gets a ton of credit for the high blindside this round with him being able to flip Mike and really take control of things. And that's part of the reason why I have Omar above Mike, is that I feel like from a pure game position, Omar is in a better position to win the game at this point. I mean, High was someone that was not loyal to Omar, like whereas Mike was kind of loyal to High until Omar was able to flip him. So I feel like Omar did technically outplay Mike at the end of the day. Plus, he's still better positioned where he still has his Taku alliance. He has Mike on his side now. And again, a lot of people seem to trust him. He's still being given this pretty good edit, but that's just it. I mean, I've said this now for multiple weeks. I said it for a lot of the season, that the main reason that I can't put him at number 1 is because of the potential decoy edit. Like, I feel like a lot of this just feels too perfect. I feel like this was largely an extension of that. However, I feel like as time passes, I think there is a potential chance that he could end up being the winner. However, it's just that inkling of doubt that they wouldn't make the winner this obvious that makes me question Omar to the point that I had to leave him here at number 2. And now at number 1, the person I think is the most likely to win Survivor 42 right now is Marianne. And yes, I did put Marianne back at number 1, even though she was not on the reward this time. And again, I literally talked about with each of the people on the reward how that the fact that they included the family visit into that while they didn't in 41 was a boost for each of them. And I think that is a big thing to consider when looking at this edit. The fact that Marianne did not get that is something. However, it is also important to note how it shouldn't be the be all end all. Like, just because Marianne wasn't on the reward doesn't mean that she's automatically dead. I mean, at the end of the day, she couldn't have been there on the reward because she didn't win it. So that is something at least. But even outside that, this was a good enough episode for her where she does find another idol immediately after playing hers at the previous tribal. I feel like that is something in her corner. And the fact that she now has an idol that Dre does not know about means that, again, she doesn't have to worry about this one being taken through the knowledge is power. So I think that's something in her corner. And again, I feel like she does talk about it in a decent way. She gets to talk about how she can use it to better her game. And that is something in her corner, at least. And plus, one other thing that I should mention is Jonathan. I mean, it's been pretty clear throughout the season that they've been setting up this rivalry between Marianne and Jonathan. I mean, Jonathan is presented as this figure who, again, has been not treating Marianne the best. And with this foreshadowing of Marianne potentially flipping on Taku towards the end game, I feel like this is setting herself up well for this flip. Maybe after Do or Die. I mean, maybe she would have flipped if it weren't for Do or Die, but we'll just have to see what happens. However, again, the fact that she has an idol, the fact that she has a means of doing this flip, of potentially making a big move and potentially taking out some big players in the process, is a big boon for her. And I think that is something in her corner. And again, she doesn't have the same concerns as Omar with her edit potentially being a decoy. Again, she still has a lot of positive elements to her edit, both in this episode and throughout the season. And yes, while she wasn't on the reward, I don't think that's a disqualifying factor. I don't think that's enough to discredit everything else that happened in this episode and stuff that has happened before. It'll be very interesting to see what she does moving forward. And it's for those reasons that I decided to have Marianne here at number 1. And there we go. That will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps with the channel. And as usual, I'll be back again next week to talk about the next episode, the Do or Die episode. That'll be fun. Big Brother Canada is about to wrap up. So actually, by the time you watch this, the season will be wrapped up and we will know the winner. So obviously through that, we'll be getting some postseason content for that. Stay tuned for that. And The Circles recently started its 4th season, and I plan to do coverage of that. So stay tuned for that. But for now, that is the video. See ya.